Nebraska Preps Postgame with Damon Benning and Jacob Padilla.
That's the big voice guy, Jacob Padilla, live in the flesh. Freshly fixed. How you feeling?
I'm feeling, well, a little worried here the way things are trending heading into the fall sports season. But right now I'm all right.
Yeah, it's hard not to have a little anxiety.
Yeah.
Right? It's you feel it coming. You hear talks, you hear rumblings. We've got practice here at 3:45 at Omaha West Side. And our coach is very diligent with the practice schedule. And for the first 11 minutes, it's COVID protocol and procedure. Now, a week ago during the coaches and parents meeting, he kind of exhaled and he said, it feels good not to have, 45 minutes of the practice or the parents meeting be about COVID protocol because it's different than a year ago, right, without the mandates and the precautions. Now, he said, we'll still have the water stations the same and individual coolers and things like that, how to do the locker room. But we felt like we were kind of moving in the right direction. And, would you have guessed a week later the numbers would be worse in Douglas County than they were a year ago when OPS didn't even play?
Yeah, that is the worrisome part. And obviously the CDC directions changing. We a lot of masks showing back up again, which that's perfectly whatever we got to do to keep it from getting back to where it was.
I'm with you.
I'm perfectly okay with that. But it's not great. But people, we didn't really learn our lesson, unfortunately, and hopefully we won't pay too much for it.
Yeah, is that what? Do you think that's what it is? I'm trying not to use the D word or the V word unless I'm talking about flights. Yeah. Some people prefer Southwest. Some people like United. Yeah. I try not to use the D word too much here, especially as of late, because it appears to be ever changing. But you just think we just were irresponsible?
I think a lot of it is people rushed to get back to normal before we were at the point where we could do it safely. So we didn't. And that, you're not going to use it, you didn't want to use it, but the vaccine hesitancy, that the combination of that made it tough to get to where we needed to get to for this to go away. And I'm obviously not a doctor. I don't know all the details of everything, but we didn't really get to the vaccination level, the immunity level, to where this thing couldn't mutate and keep growing and changing and getting worse. So now we're having to deal with the variant, and that raises the level that we have to get to for it to kind of be close to normal, back to safety.
Yeah, so OPS will vote tonight, Monday night, or at least make a recommendation. West Side already going mass K through 6th, which was not received. It was a difficult situation. Their superintendent, Dr. Lucas, I guess I would say he's very good with social media, and shared a couple of the responses, both pros and cons, right? Kind of in a no-win situation. I think Millard and Bellevue will be pending. Lincoln, we'll see what they do. They've got their hands full with the Garth Brooks concert here coming up. It's interesting because without talking about opinions on what you should or should not do, and we more than can have that conversation. Are you surprised that people refer to death and mortality rates as the line in the sand?
Not really, because
I kind of am. I'm like, why so extreme? Schools can't afford to have sicknesses on their hands.
Yeah. Well, I think a lot of people grab onto the part that helps their argument.
Maybe
so that's a lot of what it is. They're focusing on that, and obviously that's the most extreme outcome of this. Mm-hmm. But there are a lot of other outcomes, and originally a lot of the people I think that were fighting against it weren't necessarily in the most vulnerable age brackets, and now we're starting to get more people that aren't elderly aren't just immunocompromised. Getting sick, they're really sick, and some younger people are dying.
When you look at what's happening with the football season, fall sports in general coming up, do you have a feel? We've seen some sports pull it off. I still can't believe we had a state basketball finals a year ago.
Yeah.
It was tricky to navigate. We somehow pulled off football, despite OPS not playing, which was a very difficult deal, and we'll get to them in a second as they get ready to go today for their first time returning to play in a year, which has to be kind of comforting, at least for the time being. Are you surprised, or what do you expect with having contingency plans based on what the NSAA has to do, scheduling? It appears that it's going to get a little more difficult to navigate here in the next couple of weeks, and it will easier. Like, how are you kind of predicting that may shake out?
Hopefully, they were able to learn from last year, and like I said, we did make it all the way through. There are a lot of stoppages, a lot of hiccups throughout, but we did manage to make it through. We crowned state champions in every class. They adjusted on the fly, whether it be scheduling or locations, obviously with the state tournament moving to campus sites. So obviously they've got plans. I'm not in any of those meetings. I don't know what they're planning on, but I think trying to do everything they can to make sure that this season can happen, especially after last year with the OPS being out. I don't think we're headed towards that in terms of any one area.
That would be devastating.
Yeah, I don't think we're going to do that again where one part shuts it down. I think it's probably going to be more, we're going to keep going unless it's too dangerous to do it at all. And then I think it'll be kind of a group decision or whatever there. And hopefully that, just having more teams available will help a little bit too in terms of getting games played. Because that was one of the tough things about last year is just the limited number of games with teams falling off the schedule and with cancellations. Obviously, you had the gaps in the schedule. Some were able to replace them, some weren't. So hopefully the people around these schools, these kids, these athletes are doing their part to make sure that they're safe and that they're able to go through with this season.
Yeah, it's interesting. Would you rather be the NSAA and have to deal with the fall sports where the majority are outside, or try to pull it off with smaller numbers like they did with winter sports and be inside?
Yeah, that is the trade-off. And actually doing a little bit of both too with volleyball. Indoor, smaller, but indoor as well. Obviously last year we saw kind of masks were voluntary. Some programs had their players play in masks, some didn't. Some of the ones that played in masks didn't really play in masks. They just had them around their chins. But so it'll be interesting to see kind of this year how that sport plays out as well, compared directly to football, kind of going on at the same time. But yeah, there is no easy way to deal with it. I think in terms of spectators and all that, the outdoor element of it, I think, does make things much easier. You don't necessarily have to worry as much about limiting people because you're not in a building. So I think that from that standpoint, that makes things a little easier. And then kind of the bigger numbers are more on the individual coaches and programs, I think.
So if, it's obviously, we're just talking, right? It's hypotheticals, but I do think coaches are concerned. I think they're very concerned. Kind of waiting for the other shoe to drop, but you have to prepare in the meantime. Do you get the sense that OPS could, and I like what you said earlier because I'm inclined to agree with you. I just don't think it would be one school district left hung out to dry. It would be all or none. At least you hope. Now, they tried that a year ago, and it didn't work at the 11th hour. I just don't think OPS could recover from another year of them being the only ones to sit out. You have to try to not pull that off at all costs.
And especially after last year where they did make it through the season, the ones that chose to play. And I don't think I heard of any real serious situations with any student athletes as a result of the pandemic, in terms of kids getting really sick or impacted greatly long term by this. So I think that with that kind of, it was kind of the same thing with the Big Ten, where they were so cautious, but then other conferences went ahead and they were able to get through it.
It's almost like they felt like all the other kids were going to be walking down the street attending the parade, and they were going to be spectators. They're like, oh boy.
Yeah.
And everybody else is participating. We better figure out a way to pull this off.
And I think that their biggest fears of going through a season didn't play out. So now maybe you feel a little bit better about, as long as you're taking all your precautions, everybody's bought into doing the right things, that, okay, we can do this relatively safely, and it's worth trying because of what these kids have already missed out on.
So, listen, I think the team so obviously being closely affiliated to Westside, I saw their COVID protocol. I was at the parents' meeting a year ago. I thought it was unbelievable. All bias aside, I thought how meticulous and regimented the mask breaks, how to do water, the staggering of the kids in and out of the locker room, 2 different areas for people to show up, the lifting in shifts. I felt like, okay, Coach Freund knows he has a championship caliber team. Yeah. Senior laden, a lot of good players. You want to play this season out at all costs. Safe to say this year, that team is off of 370, right? Where very senior laden bunch, a lot of quality players. You're going to do Coach Huffman will probably do what he can to have to pull this season off, even though personally, which is a lot of people, it's not just Coach Huffman, may go against your own personal beliefs, but for the greater good, you'll do what you have to pull this season off. I think that's Bellevue West this year.
Yeah, and I think Westside as a whole, obviously, from Mike Lucas on down throughout the district, and the coaches,
you know what?
They were pretty proactive, and they were really, like you said,
much along the lines of Dr. Rippey, who does a fantastic job for the city of Bellevue.
Yeah, so they were lockstep throughout that whole. They're going to do everything they can to make things as safe as possible. It may not be convenient, but nothing about living in a pandemic is convenient, so they're going to do what they need to. And I think Bellevue West probably is thinking a lot of the same ways, especially after seeing
how last year went. A Camise, a Helms, a Riley Ducker. I mean, you want those guys, that's just to name a few, to be able to pull this season off. And it's but you're going to need the public's help. In football, it's so interesting. Right, and it's one of the reasons why I love the sport. The practice and sweat equity is so much greater than in games. The reward isn't near as immediate or near as frequent as it is in baseball, volleyball, softball, basketball, where you may play 2 or 3 times a week, let alone in a weekend. Yeah. Football's different. Like, you need everybody's help. It's the consummate team game.
Absolutely. And like you said, the sheer numbers involved in with a football team and multiple programs. Obviously, they try to keep them split up as much as possible, but there's only so much you can do with the limited locker rooms and facility space and all that kind of stuff. So, yeah, it really does take a lot of people doing the right things to be able to pull this off.
So if you're the NSAA right now and you don't want to get you don't want to have it be paralysis by analysis, right? You don't want to think yourself into what ifs where you can't move forward, but you do have to have some contingency plans. How fluid do you think what's happening in that office is? Or does last year kind of lend itself to having a little bit of a roadmap?
Yeah, I think they've got the roadmap to start with, but
where's Nate Newhouse when we need him? He should be a podcast guest.
Yeah, but we've got to be able to adjust on the fly, and we don't know where. We've got 2-3 weeks here now before we're really for the first games here. We don't know what it's going to be like at that point. We don't know what it's going to be like in a month and a half. What they start with may not work throughout. They may have to adjust, whether it's attendance, whether it's other precautions throughout the week leading up to games, whatever the deal is. They're going to have to be ready, and I'm sure they're talking through all that right now. But it's going to have to be consistent communication throughout, every week, every day, whatever it is. And the NSA and everybody involved with pulling off sports, once again, it's going to be a challenge to pull it off this season.
I guess I'm always a little taken aback at how can I say this? You need so many other people involved to pull off these fall sports other than the players themselves. Do you think we're prepared as a community to have kind of this it truly takes a village mentality?
I would hope so, especially after, again, last year.
You kind of got that wry smile, right? It's like, well, you hope we learned.
Yeah, hopefully, again, that's, I think, the vast majority of the people in this are in it for the kids and for providing that opportunity. And this is just another part of doing that, of doing what you need to personally, your personal responsibility to make sure that, hey, I'm not going to be the one to mess this up. No matter who you're around, who you interact with, whatever your job is on that given day, be smart, take whatever precautions necessary, make sure that you're not the person that messes this up for this entire team.
Let's stay right here in the metro with Benson and Bryan and Omaha South, Central, Burke, North, and Omaha Northwest, right, all returning to play. Obviously, you have a few usual suspects, Omaha North, Omaha Burke, typically very good in terms of metro schools. Central, I liked what I saw at the locker room camp, especially along the offensive and defensive lines. Is there a school or schools, just off the cuff, because we won't get into real personnel until the next couple of weeks in particular, outside of the obvious, Keyshawn Williams or Deshaun Woods or, Devin Jackson, guys like that. But is there a team that you think is in the discussion of the Bellevue West, the Lincoln Southeast, the Millard Souths? There's some good ones out there. Is there a team that you kind of have your eye on, or two or three?
I think Burke's probably maybe the most interesting just based on where they were when they left off.
Yeah.
And for all these teams, it's going to be interesting to see, one, what they've lost in the year off, like how tough is it going to be to dive back in, and then two, a lot of these schools did lose players to other schools. Ricky Lofton right now is over. Who's going to play at Burke? Is over at Council Bluffs. And is doing really well for himself right now. I'm sure they'd love to have him, but a lot of them were probably seniors last year. But I don't know how many juniors or underclassmen left because they wanted to play last year and didn't come back. So it'll be interesting to see just kind of top to bottom where these programs are coming off the year off and how many of them. Like you mentioned, we know the stars that those guys were fine. They're going to be all right. They kind of stayed put. But where are kind of the depth? Where are the guys around them? What does the program look like now, missing so much time? Yeah,
if I take the 30,000-foot view, I think the thing that's the most surprising about the Metro right now is where has all the skill gone?
Yeah.
Right? It's a lot of other places, right? I'm speaking to it. There's a couple kids that I know we're going to Omaha North that are now at Omaha West Side, and Jamez Ross and obviously Caleb. You've got a couple of kids that are out at Millard South. You have two that are out at Millard North. I can't say that people saw ahead of time that OPS may not play next year, but when I look at them up front and I look at North, tremendous up front on offensive and defensive lines. Omaha Burke, pretty good on the offensive and defensive lines. Omaha Central, very good size along the offensive and defensive line. Is it weird to have conversations and not talk about the Metro skill per se?
Yeah, and that's, kind of a big part of what's defined the last couple years with Bellevue West, obviously, and they're gonna be right there again with all the guys they've got. But West Side, some of the
very good skill.
Yeah, and they've got a couple guys back, obviously, but it'll be interesting to see kind of the quarterbacks that rise to the top. And
I actually think that's the key.
Yeah, how they're able to take care. There are some good skilled players still spread out around. How many guys are going to be able to get them the ball?
Yeah. Listen, if I'm at Omaha Central, I'm going to hand the ball. I'm going to figure out somebody that's upright with a pulse to hand the ball to Jalen Lloyd, right? The triple jumper track extraordinary, very good running back.
Run off left tackle about 30 times a game.
How many ways can I get Devin Jackson and some of these guys the ball at Burke? Keyshawn Williams at Omaha North, who belongs in the discussion. I think it's Devin Jackson. If you're just talking Metro skill guys, I think it's Devin Jackson. I think it's Keyshawn Williams.
Well,
right?
and I think Devin might be the guy I'm most interested in seeing, because last year would have been his breakout year. He got the offers without being a big-time part of that
Tremendous
Burke
size,
team.
tremendous speed.
Special teams player, kind of rotation player. He was not yet kind of the star of that team. That was going to be last year where he stepped up and was kind of the go-to guy, both sides of the ball, however they were going to use him. I'm interested to see kind of now what that looks like with him stepping into that role, since we missed out on that last year.
Yeah, can you imagine? You talked about quarterback play. If Bellevue West gets good quarterback play.
Yeah. And that's one of the biggest, I think, preseason storylines is like, how's that looking?
It's going to be a tough team to play, right, with Daniel Kalin and their returning starter with Johansson, who I don't believe is going to let that job go. I think he's the best that they have, and I think he's going to give them the best chance to win, especially early. Gage Stenger, probably going to have to play a fair amount of quarterback at Millard South, but have a lot of other pieces around him. But you could make the case he was one of their better skill guys as a wide receiver outside of Urban a year ago. Lincoln Southeast, if they get good quarterback play, is a very, very dangerous football team. Burke, if they get good quarterback play. Omaha North, if they get good quarterback play. Omaha West Side, if we get good quarterback play. It's amazing how even at the high school level, it's still so quarterback driven.
Yeah. Well, I mean, it's football, and that's the most important. Even at the high
Remember
school,
when you used to be able to hand the ball off and have some sort of peace of mind?
Yeah. Well, I think coaches got a lot smarter on the defensive side of the ball now. It's a lot harder to just dominate in the trenches and run 100 times a game. So we've seen some of the teams that have kind of stuck with the predominantly running game haven't been able to kind of keep up with some of the others that are more balanced, more explosive.
And maybe at Millard South is probably the best case study from a year ago, right? A team that was tremendous running the football, but what did we say? Need to find a way to make plays in the vertical passing game. Elkhorn South, tremendous on the ground, probably needed to find ways to make plays in the vertical passing game. This morning I thought of you. We were talking to Howard Griffith from the Big Ten Network, and we talked about Coach Bielema. Brett Bielema led teams and his offensive coordinator that have ran the ball on average 63% of the time. And we asked Howard, we said, hey, can you win a Big Ten championship? Now, keep in mind what I'm getting ready to say. Yeah. Can you win a Big Ten championship running the football 63% of the time? And a former fullback, former Denver Broncos star, former Illinois Hoosier, or Illinois Fighting Illini, gives the great big sigh, and he said, I don't think you can win a Big Ten title running the football like that. It's just too hard to run the ball efficiently 60% of the time.
And especially
I thought for myself, and I'm thinking, there are a couple of teams at the Metro level. North was probably the last team that I saw that was good enough to do it.
Yeah.
That 2014, the 2017 team, too, where you could hand the ball off to a Calvin Strong or a Xander Gray or a Milton Sarbar, where you didn't have to throw the ball. But we were elite defensively as well. Yeah. I mean, can you get away with not being able to at least make some plays in the passing game?
Well, even Bellevue West, as good as their running game is.
Oh, great example. With L.J. Richardson, right? He's fantastic.
And they fell off kind of when they lost that game.
To Lincoln East.
Johansson struggled. Like, that's kind of the first time he'd been in that situation. Hopefully for their sake, he was able to learn from that if he holds on to that job.
Isn't that interesting? They had to go to Keegan Johnson at the Wildcat spot against Kearney to give themselves the best chance to win because they couldn't make plays in the passing game with all those weapons.
Yep. And even Kearney, like, obviously it's option run downhill with your quarterback, but he made some big plays passing the ball in their big wins. So you've got to have that element because it's just so hard, because most of the time you're going to play teams that can do at least a little bit of both. And if you can't, it's going to be hard to keep up and go play for play with them unless you absolutely have a dominant defense. And I think there's going to be a lot of teams that have some really good defensive players. Is there anybody that can win their games solely on their defense this year?
So let me ask you this. We've only got a couple minutes left. So there's two teams in particular that I think people think are built to give who I think will be the preseason favorite Bellevue West to run. Lincoln Southeast, very good along the interior. They have good skill with Applegate. They need quarterback play. Yeah. The other is Millard South. I may even throw in prep, but I'll tell you after we play them in the opener because something's got to give there because they're good up front on the offensive and defensive lines. Is there a team in the aforementioned where you think if you could pencil them in as getting good quarterback play is a challenger to the perception of the Bellevue West T-Birds?
Yeah, so I think maybe Southeast I might go.
That's
just
what I would go with.
When you've got the blend of, you've got a Jake Applegate, two-way impact player, just one of the most athletic players that you're going to find in Class A this year. You've got Butenbach, Max
fantastic
Butenbach,
player.
who obviously multi-sport kid, plays both sides of the ball, kind of primary running back there, is a good athlete. You've got Tuioti, who's coming on as a pass rusher, can make plays behind the line in the scrimmage. You've got a handful of guys there. Question is, they got to find a new quarterback there. And they had Dennis Schneider last year. I don't even know who their backup.
Can you imagine if Walter from Lincoln East, who I love, his brother was fantastic too. Can you imagine if a guy like Walter was like, you know what, I think I'm gonna enter the high school transfer portal, and all of a sudden, because he may be the best kept secret as far as pure spinners.
Yeah.
Would you agree with me on that? I think he's sensational.
Yeah,
from Lincoln East.
Yeah, we talked about him a few times last year, and he is not afraid to let it rip. Like, he'll take any shot down the field, so you've got to be on your toes against him as a defense. So, yeah.
Is Millard South the next in that tier?
I think so. They do obviously have some good skill back outside of Stenger.
Yeah, with Gasaway and Rucker, and those guys are going to be a handful.
Yeah, they got some athletes. But, again, how is that dynamic going to work out with Stenger, quarterback, versus taking him out from the outside? Obviously, he's going to be playing defense, I'm sure, too, both ways. So it'll be interesting to see kind of how he settles into that role. Fortunately for them, they did experiment with that kind of towards the second half of last year. So he's got some experience there. He's got some comfort there. But, yeah, I think Westside, obviously belongs in that mix as well. I think they've got a lot coming back, obviously, with Dominic Rizak. And Colby Brown, he got to play quite a bit last year as a backup quarterback.
He's a talented kid.
Because of how many games they had in control. That's the benefit of winning games big, is you can get your backup, your younger guys in there and get some experience. So they've got him kind of stepping in there.
He's a very talented kid. I obviously like Wimmer.
Yeah,
I like Grant Guyette.
That's good.
I obviously think my kiddo's a pretty good player. They've got a chance. For them, it will be what happens along the offensive line, because they've got some options. Jamez Ross is going. I tell you what, for a team that I think will be preseason top 5, maybe 6, they're scary young. They may not play it. I say they. We may not play a ton of seniors. It is a young football team. They've got a really, really high ceiling with their freshman and sophomore classes. I kind of feel a lot like that with Millard South as well.
And hopefully we'll get enough games in this season for teams to make the growth that they need. With
from your lips to God's ears. I don't even want to sound like that, but I feel like, people, I know, shoot, we're in the Metro.
Yeah.
It's a little ominous right now, right? You kind of feel like there's this football cloud. I'm just telling you, coaches, administration, if we want to pull this season off, we're going to have to rally, and we're going to have to do it in a big way. It's going to take everybody's help. Because, the numbers just aren't in our favor, and I think the detractors are pointing out that a year ago, you took a lot more precautions with the numbers not near where they are at the start of today, which is kind of scary.
Yeah. Fingers crossed. That's all I can say at this point. I'd like to be able to watch some good football this year, and I'd like for those kids to be able to go out and do what they love.
Yep, we'll get in a little more in-depth. We'll talk top players from the 2022-23 classes coming up next week. A little bit of foreshadowing with what we see in the rankings. We'll top it off hopefully there's going to be a season to continue to talk about. We're optimistic, man. We're going to speak it into existence. Let's be better. Let's find a way to pull this off. That's Jacob Padilla, one of the best in the business. I'm ODB. This is Nebraska Preps Postgame. Back next week.
A Hurrdat Media Production.